Wednesday, Sarang Youth. Welcome to our Wednesday 큐티사랑. Today's passage for quiet time is going to be Acts chapter 8, verses 26 through 29. So let's open our Bibles to chapter 8, verses 26 through 29 in the book of Acts. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Rise and go toward the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a desert place." And he rose and went. And there was an Ethiopian, a eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all her treasure. He had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning, seated in his chariot, and he was reading the prophet Isaiah. And the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over and join this chariot." So we heard a message on this passage on Sunday. We heard on Philip's obedience last Sunday through Pastor Peter. Today, as I meditated on this passage again, what hit me was the fact that Philip, he first heard the voice of the Holy Spirit before he went to the Ethiopian to speak to him, before he obeyed and went to speak to him. And so, if we want to obey and live according to God's will, then we must first learn how to hear God's voice first. And so as I was reading this passage and meditating on it, I was asking myself, how am I doing in terms of listening into the Holy Spirit's voice throughout my days? And how sensitive am I to the leading of the Holy Spirit? Am I really paying attention to God's voice? And you might say, what does it even mean to hear God's voice? I don't hear anything and I don't feel anything. I feel like God doesn't really speak to me. And you know, the reason why we can't hear God's voice is not because God is not speaking to us. God is constantly speaking to his people. So the problem is not with God, but it lies with us. And when I talk about hearing God's voice, I'm not talking about hearing like an audible voice.
"Susan, I want you to go to this person and share the gospel."
Right? I don't hear God's voice audibly. Well, yes, sometimes God does, and he chooses to speak in dramatic ways to people through visions and miracles, just like he appeared to Philip. But more often than not, he speaks to us through his word, which is the Bible. And he nudges at our hearts. He tugs at our hearts. Sometimes it comes like a gentle voice. Sometimes it's strong. And so what we have to do is we have to put ourselves in a place where we are ready to hear God's voice, where we can hear his voice. And we have to be familiar with God's voice in order for us to distinguish his voice from my own voice and other people's voices. And the question is, how do we do that? How do we become familiar with God's voice? And I thought about two things as I did my quiet time today. Number one, it's through spending time with God by reading the word regularly. The key word there is regularly. It's not just when we desperately need God's help. A lot of times we cry out to God when a test is coming up and we need to pray for a good grade. Or sometimes when we're anxious and we need God's peace, that's when we cry out to God and we frantically search in the Bible for a verse that will encourage us. But rather than doing that, if we are consistent and if we regularly seek God in his word and we learn about his character, who he is through the word, then what happens is we become naturally more familiar with his voice and with the ways that he works. It'll be easier. We'll become better at recognizing God's voice. And so number two, how do we become more familiar with God's voice and hearing his voice in our day-to-day lives? It's by welcoming in his presence and welcoming in the Holy Spirit into our lives every moment. And so as we go about living our day, he might just bring certain passages to our mind and he will call us to obedience in certain things. And he might be leading us to certain places or certain people, just like he spoke to Philip. If we constantly invite God into our lives and we ask the Holy Spirit to walk with us, and even as you're studying or doing chores around the house, you're conversing with God. If you ask him, "God, what should I do today to bring glory to you? What do I need to do to really share your love with the people that are in my life?" if you really go about your day asking these questions to God, then He will bring certain things to your mind. And that one person that God is calling you to go talk to. And that one thing that God is calling you to do. If we respond in obedience, then we will definitely experience more miracles. My application is to stop at certain hours throughout the day to just be still and silent, asking the Holy Spirit to lead me so that I can live in obedience and really experience His power in my life. So that is it for today, and I will see you again next time.